Hello everyone. Today I will be presenting the part 2 and 3 of my portfolio. The part 2 focus on the intercultural interaction analysis between the characters of the film outsourced, focusing on power dynamics, implicit assumptions, and sociopragmatic norms in a cross-cultural workplace. The part 3 focus on the critical reflection on media through the weaponization of words and expression, as well as pedagogical proposal. The movie tells the story of Todd Anderson, an American product manager sent to India to train a call center team. His mandate is to reduce the average call time from 12 minutes to 6 minutes. Todd is a capable manager with a team of professional, educated, native English speakers. I want to make this clear because the failures found are not caused by his ineptitude. They actually come from a fundamental misunderstanding and assumptions that each party holds, especially the protagonist. To understand those failures, it helps to first look at the condition where the interactions take place. Todd arrived with an institutional authority. The performance, the training curriculum, and the criteria for what counts as a professional communication are all American. He sees his own communicative norm as the neutral professional standard while marking the other norms as deviations that need correction. For him, that is simply how a call center runs. And for the first part of the movie, he never perceived those actions as cultural imposition. Implicit assumptions. The first analytical category is implicit assumptions. Hall explains implicit assumptions are taken for granted belief that speakers assume are universal. They are so embedded in the individual that it is hard for them to explain them when questioned. In the film, this phenomenon is best illustrated in the first training session that Todd has. He presents the subject of small talk as a technique to warm up customers. For Manid, an employee trained in a formal and direct telephone interaction, this subject is kind of hard for them to understand. And Todd cannot explain it very well because, and you justify it because he never had to. And for the rest of the team, this seems like a subject that should not be taken into account. The failure is that Todd implicitly treats American norms as the only legitimate resource for workers' communication, assuming that the function of smart talk is universal and can be disconnected from the specific cultural context that give it meaning. Sociopragmatic norms. Keske defines sociopragmatic norms as the ones that govern what counts as appropriate, honor, or respectful behavior within a particular cultural context. In the film, there is a clash between Todd and one of his workers. When Todd is explaining them how to develop a Chicago accent and try to create a small talk about certain places in the United States, Asha refuses. She explains that she's not someone from Chicago and finds the instruction dishonest because they're asking them to roleplay as someone from the United States where they are already from India. Todd frames that deception as a way of managing customer discomfort because American consumers doesn't like outsourcing very much. For him, this professional identity can be adjusted when business requires. But for Asha, that professional conduct can be something as a way to compromise what she finds as truthful as respectful as well. Neither Todd or Aisha are objectively wrong. Todd's initial response treats deception as unavoidable. It suggests that for him, identities can be traded off against each other when business requires. For Asha, she presents resistance to that because she prefers to defend her personal and cultural integrity, which cannot simply be suspended for commercial convenience. Acculturation. For most of the first half of the film, Todd operates within the minimization stage of acculturation, resembling that Wynne mentions when people decide to simplify the view of other cultures by thinking we are not different at all. He might have anticipated thought that the intercultural exchanges outside the office would be different, but he never considered that such difference would exist in the sales department, failing to acknowledge that people are different at certain levels. It is only when Todd acknowledged that failure of his initial approach that the acceptance stage begins in the acculturalization. The shift begins when Todd admits that he is not longer sees his norms as universal, but one as many to organize work. From that point, his behavior moves to one of adaptation. He begins by asking his teams that what will improve their workday. They ask for family photos, religious art, and freedom to wear their own clothing. He also redesigns the incentive program around items from the catalog that the team initially found confusing. As a result, the call times drop as employees' morale rises and confusion decreases. Wynne describes adaptation as the stage where cultural knowledge moves to behavioral acting levels. The outcome of that shift in Keck's terms is that it creates an emerging common ground, a shared understanding built through the interaction of specifics in that relationship, and belonging to neither the American or the Indian cultural frame in isolation. In the 1956 film Invasion of the Body Snatcher, serves as a lens of examining how language and emotional expression can be weaponized against cultural groups. Wynne categorizes the United States as a low context culture. However, during the Cold War era, the people in power began to promote media disguised as propaganda that altered the communication context of the country, creating a high context reliance on shared and unspoken assumptions. In the film, the term alien is named after entities from outside of America. So, at the political level, the term was weaponized to target and antagonize everyone that didn't belong to the United States, especially the Soviet citizens, whose communication and behavioral patterns was seen as inhuman for not being from America. The weapon works through what Keskes called as silence. This describes that how certain interpretation of words activate automatically through prior exposure. What propaganda does here is manage that prior exposure by repeating a word in a specific and media context until its negative interpretation becomes the first to appear. In the case of Alien, during the Cold War, the term was deployed in political speeches and media coverage to ensure that audience activates, let's say, dehumanizing reading wherever the target group was mentioned. The film reinforces this through emotional expression. The protagonist learns to detect both people in the way they manage their faces, becoming the first criteria for identifying the other ones. Ekman research mentioned that different cultures had different norms on how to display emotion, how to express themselves. The propaganda was aware of that and weaponized it into see it as, as a threat. The cultural and the individual identity of the Soviet was reduced to a predefined cultural label. The people in power applied effectively what Holiday mentioned as the process of authorization. Same mechanism is operational in contemporary political discourse. The phrase illegal aliens repeated across right-wing platforms, news cycles, and political speeches is something that is trying to manage that silence in the same way of the 50s. Artificial repetition during now digital media builds peer exposure at scale, ensuring that dissemination interpretation activates almost automatically. This is a direct pedagogical concern as a teacher, because if teachers lack the pragmatic awareness to identify how language is used to authorize, the classroom then cannot counteract the patterns such as the common memes that try to apply to a specific subject, and those patterns could be absorbed for the students in the media environment. A practical way to develop this capacity is through intercultural media analysis. Students can see how authorization, culturism, and the weaponization of language operates in the media. However, critical media analysis alone is not sufficient. It is equally important to first help the students to develop metacognitive awareness on how their own prior experience shapes their interpretation of L2 input and how their intercultural prior experience will shape the interpretation of the L2 output. A student who can identify authorizing mechanism in a new headline might still fail to recognize how their own cultural assumptions influence their interpretation of a classroom interaction, because that analytical skill did not transfer to self-awareness. This is why the foundation must be metacognitive awareness, the capacity to pause and ask what prior knowledge a message assumes, and whether that assumption matches the listener's background. The workshop I designed responds to the body's natural reflections by addressing the foundation skills of metacognitive awareness on how prior cultural context shapes interpretation. The session is 60 minutes designed for undergraduate English learners at levels A to B1 at the Magdalena. The media is a Simpsons clip for only 30 seconds from the second season, episode 7, where Homer and Bart watch the Macy Thanksgiving Day parody. The clip is simple. The students follow what the characters are saying without much difficulty. What divides is whether they have the cultural background knowledge for that the clip assumes. For example, the Macy's parade itself, the value characters, the expression, for example, of flash in the pants, and some students will find the scene funny and some others will not, even if they are at the same level of proficiency. And the difference is the instructional resources. Overall, the workshop activities hopes to move the students from individual interpretation to noticing to social comprehension and to reflective questioning.